Critical Thinking, Chapter 6. What does the term critical thinking really mean? Today we'll explore what critical thinking is, how to become a critical thinker, and how to apply critical thinking skills such as problem solving, decision making, and creativity to your academic and personal life. Okay. So right now we are at the beginning of Chapter 6. In my book, this section that corresponds with this slide is on page 94, and it spills over all the way to page 97. So again, pages 94 through 97. If you're following along in the book, if your page numbers are slightly different, it starts with the second page of the chapter. All aspects of college academic life require that you use critical thinking skills. Instructors expect you to think more critically and carefully than before, to think freely and analytically, to ask questions and offer a fresh perspective, and to be willing to think outside the box. Critical thinking is the core of a college education. These 5 steps that you see here on this slide will help make critical thinking a reflex. So we want this to be second nature for you. And be familiar with these 5 steps. You're going to see 4 questions on your midterm exam related to critical thinking. One of them is going to reference the 5 steps on this slide. So that's just something to watch out for and take an extra special note on. Step 1, ask questions and answer them. Asking and answering questions will help you clarify details, clear up confusion, and push for deeper understanding of the material. Step 2, evaluate your reactions. By critically evaluating your reaction to the material, you're asking yourself not only whether an argument makes sense, but also whether you actually believe it or not. Step 3, analyze the information with a critical lens. So step 2 and step 3 are going over to page 95. Try to poke holes in arguments and ask whether anything is missing. Has any evidence or information been forgotten, covered up, or ignored? Step 4, make connections and keep the big picture in mind. So step back periodically and synthesize what you're learning in order to see the big picture. Synthesizing, which means combining information in a coherent and meaningful way while making connections, can clarify what is most important. Number 5, so step 5. Apply your learning to your own life experiences. This is what's going to help you be able to retain the information and convert it over from short-term to long-term memory. And when you can make those meaningful connections, it's going to help bring the material to life. The more you can bring your past experiences into the college learning process, the more powerful your critical thinking skills will be. If you personalize material and make it matter to you, you're more likely to think deeply about it. Sorry. Engaging in critical thinking isn't easy. Try to do so by following these suggestions. Avoid being a passive observer during lectures. Agreeing with everything prevents you from thinking critically about the information presented. And that's the same thing in the workplace. A lot of times they don't want just a yes man or woman. They want the right and the best employee for the job. So in some cases that does mean finding the balance between let me speak up here, but let me also make sure that I don't make the person that is speaking, especially if it is my supervisor or the head of the board of directors or some bigwig, I don't make them look bad or make them feel threatened, but I'm still making sure that the actions that I'm taking are basically the best route for the company at hand. Remember that your perspective is valuable and is also a new one. Sharing and understanding your reactions to material will enhance your thinking. Try to ask questions. Try to ask any questions you have. If you're not asking questions, you're not engaging in critical thinking. Making a personal connection to the material you're learning about can increase your interest in and motivation to study that material, meaning you will think more deeply and perform more successfully. Study groups can be sources of innovation and creativity, where multiple points of view come together. Sometimes, however, a few opinions come to dominate the group discussion. It can be hard to go against the conclusions of group reaches, but make sure to stay true to your own thought process and conclusions. So just to recap here, we have the 5 steps for critical thinking. You will see those again in the form of a task question. And try to let those free ideas flow. Bring you into the equation, meaning make the critical thinking personal, so that way you'll be more engaged in it and then you're more likely to retain the information. And then avoid groupthink and study group. So don't just go along with the crowd just because it seems like everybody's going along with it. You may see something that the group didn't see, and that could make or break your project. It's just remember that there's a diplomatic way to approach some of these different types of class discussions. So this slide corresponds with page 101 in the textbook. It's the bluish gray chart that takes up, I would say, probably the top 3/4 of the page. And it has the same title, 5 questions to help you build your critical thinking muscles. And these are the 5 points that are listed there. What is my immediate reaction to this? And in doing that, you would want to write down your immediate reactions to lectures, class discussions, and readings without censoring your thoughts. So no filter, write out your initial thoughts before you go in there and try to provide that more tactful response. When a topic is being debated or discussed, come up with counter arguments even if you agree with what is being said. Stretch yourself to consider more than one side of the debate. So with point 2, which is what is the other side of the argument, if any of you guys end up taking philosophy or ethics or anything like that, those types of courses are going to challenge you to kind of play both sides. In speech classes, you're going to see it too, but I know, especially when I took ethics about a year ago, and I took it in a business context, we had questions about not just right or wrong, or good or bad, moral or immoral, but we had to take case studies as far as what companies, it's like some of the different company practices that some of these major Fortune 50 companies are doing. And we had to look at, okay, well, just because what they did is legal, they didn't violate any laws. Was it in poor taste? Was it ethical even though it was legal? So those are some of those things that are going to challenge you there. So some of you guys that like to debate, or might be some of my future lawyers, oh, you'll love that. What questions do I have about the material? Before each new class session, write down 3 questions you might want to ask about the material that had already been covered, so that way you can reflect on it. How does this material connect to what I've already learned? Also, at the end of each class, find 2 ways the material could be connected to the previous class and write that in your notes. Because in a lot of cases, one lesson will build on the next lesson. And lastly, how does this relate to my life? During study sessions, figure out if there's at least one way the material could meaningfully relate to your life. So that's why you see, even though we are in a classroom setting and in an academic setting, I do try to incorporate how some of these situations that you're going to read about in the book and what you're going to see on your exams, especially because there's going to be a lot of scenarios, how those classroom situations can also translate over into the workplace and help you with certain aspects of building your interpersonal skills, teamwork and team building, as well as conflict resolution or de-escalating situations in the office. So that's the big picture that goes with that. Where to use your critical thinking skills. So if you're following along with me, that is actually on page 102 of the textbook. It's at the very top of the page. And this is a continuation of those 5 steps for critical thinking that we talked about. So number 1, ask a lot of questions and answer them. Number 2, evaluate your own reactions. Number 3, analyze the information with a critical lens. Step 4, or number 4, make connections and keep the big picture in mind. And number 5, apply your learning to your own life experiences. So that was the information on the previous slide. We're going to carry that over and apply critical thinking and inside of different situations. So we're going to look at critical thinking in the problem-solving process, critical thinking in the decision-making process, and lastly, we're going to look at critical thinking in the creative process. And I would just recommend try using the 5 steps from the previous slide in any order while reading class assignments, completing problem sets, in math or science, researching and writing papers, participating in group projects, and listening to lectures. You can also apply your critical thinking skills to everyday college life when you are solving problems or making decisions throughout any creative process. And this can branch over into the workplace, especially for those of you guys that are in situations where you have to troubleshoot different issues, or you need to work together as a team and either develop or refine a new process or training. So here's one thing that we do want to look at here. In critical thinking while problem solving, there's a couple things to keep in mind. Number 1, understand the root of the problem. Number 2, gather and analyze information. And 3, brainstorm all possible solutions. So you're going to see something referenced in that format on the midterm. There's actually 4 questions from this chapter on your exam that you're going to have later related to critical thinking, and that there is one specific to critical thinking and the problem solving process. It's going to require that you're familiar with the steps that are on this slide at the top. Good problem solving depends on critical thinking, so keep a few guidelines in mind. And what we're going to do is we're going to break this apart a little bit. So just to reiterate, understand the root of the problem. So you don't want to treat the symptoms, you want to get to the root cause, so then that way, whatever it is, you can solve the problem and it doesn't resurface or reoccur again. Take time to determine where the problem is coming from. By uncovering the root of the problem, you're also more likely to find the right solution. Gather and analyze information. Determine what information or resources would help you when solving the problem. Then brainstorm possible solutions and use your judgment to determine which solution would work best. And then moving forward into critical thinking in the decision-making process, here's a couple things to keep in mind. Critical thinking is a fundamental part of the decision-making process as well as in problem solving. And the steps are really similar. So start by clarifying the decision you're making. So you see that's bullet point 1 under critical thinking while making decisions. Simplify the decision. Making the process by stripping away certain aspects of the decision that are irrelevant. So sometimes you have information overload and you want to scale some of those things back so that way you can focus in on different pieces of the problem. And then next, gather and analyze this information that you've collected. What information do you need to consider when making your decision? Finally, weigh the pros and cons, comparing positive and negative aspects of each possible option. And then remember to engage your critical thinking skills throughout the decision-making process. You'll be more satisfied with your decision if you critically think it through first. Then lastly, when we look at critical thinking and how it is connected or tied to creativity, here's what we need to keep in mind here. So creativity and critical thinking are intricately linked. You need to be creative when engaging in aspects of critical thinking, such as coming up with examples that clarify an idea, trying to poke holes in a well-supported argument, or developing new or alternative explanations. Think critically throughout the creative process by taking the time to question, analyze, and evaluate what you are creating. Five ways you use critical thinking in everyday college life. So that's going to be the blue chart on page 103. So we're getting closer to the end of chapter 6 at this point. And the 5 bullet points here are going to correspond with what you see inside of the chart. So feel free to follow along with me as we are picking apart these different points and take some notes because they might be able to help you out not only in the classroom but also in the workplace and within your home situation as well. So number 1, when making choices about how to spend your time outside of class. So college life can be complicated, especially if you have a job, a family to care for, or both. Because you are likely juggling quite a few tasks and responsibilities, you need to be very thoughtful about how you spend your time. During class discussion is number 2. Whenever you're involved in a class discussion in which different sides of an argument are being evaluated, you're using critical thinking skills. While working on a new fundraiser for your favorite student organization, or it could be a fundraiser just out in the community if you're involved, or it could be something work-related as well. To have a successful fundraiser, you need to be creative and to analyze what has and hasn't worked in the past. Number 4, when deciding whether to switch majors. Before switching majors, you need to weigh the pros and cons of the decision. You have to ask and answer many important questions to be sure. So be sure to think deeply about what you really want to do. And lastly, the 5th way you can use critical thinking in everyday life is while discussing your future with an advisor or mentor. So when we're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life and what you want to be when you grow up, that's something that, we do push forward on. Conversations about your future can be intense and require deep introspection. Honestly examining your past and present experiences, as well as keeping your mind open to possibilities, will push your thinking in new ways. So now we're going to move forward to the last slide here. Critical thinking in decision making. So now we've made ourselves get to the last slide that is within the presentation, and notice that critical thinking in decision making has its own standalone slide. So we saw this a little bit earlier, and where I'm at in the book is on page pages 106 and 107. And what you're going to see with those three areas that they mentioned a couple slides ago is critical thinking while problem solving starts on page 102. Then critical thinking when making decisions actually starts on page 104, and it's going to carry you through this chart that you see here that is on pages 106 and 107. And then finally, we're going to close out the chapter with critical thinking and creativity on the last page of this chapter, which in my book is page 108. And it's just recommended that you glance over these last couple of steps when you're making decisions. This could impact you in an educational setting, in a home setting, or in the workplace. So you can apply it for various aspects of your life. So number one, reframe the decision and make sure you fully understand what the decision is really about. So whether you're making a decision about applying to a specific program, transferring to a university, it could entail things outside of academia, so outside of the college environment, where it could be, I need to decide between replacing my car versus purchasing a new one. Am I going to finance a car, or am I going to save up the money to purchase a cash car? It could relate to like your living situation. So whether you're making a decision to move out, or whether you're making a decision to change from a renting to a buying situation. So whether you're going to purchase a home or a condo, those are big life-altering decisions. And it could also be something in the workplace. So whether you could consider changing jobs, it could include relocation out of the area, or out of the state, or in some cases taking an assignment outside of the country. Or it could entail a promotion. While it may come with additional money, it could also come with additional responsibilities, such as being on call, having to come in on nights and weekends, and an increase in workload where those other ad hoc duties as assigned tasks come front and center. So you'd have to weigh if that increase in pay and that position that you really wanted compared to what your family dynamic is now versus what it could turn into. For your respective situation, is it going to be worth it? And that's what leads me into point number 2. Outline the basic information you must consider when making an informed decision, and be honest about the pros and the cons. And lastly, after making the final decision, sleep on it if you can, and revisit the decision-making process the next morning. Continue to evaluate how things are going. So where I've seen this here in the educational setting is I've had students that were ready to graduate, and they met the deadlines to apply for the university of their choice, and they got accepted, and we got to celebrate and be happy and excited and do victory laps around the building. But they missed the deadline to apply for financial aid to pay for their education, and we are dealing with 5 figures with some of these universities, and so we're dealing with tens of thousands of dollars that we need to come up with every single year. And for some people, I've had to kind of put the brakes on them and kind of say, you know what, I know this isn't what you want to hear. I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, but I don't want to see you go over there and take out $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in a loan every year when all we had to do was really wait one more semester, have you apply for financial aid and internal scholarships, and see how much money we could actually get that you don't have to pay back. Because after all, the reason that many of you are here is to advance your current living situation. So whether that is to obtain gainful employment within the field of your choice, some of you are planning to be entrepreneurs and you're going to start your own business. And then there's some of you guys that are already working for the career of your choice, but you want to advance and get promoted within that particular field. So we want to make sure when you're making those decisions that you actually don't put yourself in a situation where you're digging yourself into a financial hole and you're actually worse off than where you began. That's what we don't want to happen. If that's happening, then we're doing a disservice to you. Okay? All right, so that brings us to the conclusion of Chapter 6. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a good day. Goodbye.